Hey, great to have you here. So today we're going to be talking about Dexter Original Sin, episode 10, titled Code Blues. So not much to mention before jumping into the episode details here. Obviously at this point for Dexter content, we're going to start to turn our attention to Dexter Resurrection. I'll probably do at least one more video on Original Sin type of content and do kind of some post-mortem looking at the season as a whole and further details. Other than that, I did want to say thanks for joining me on the ride of Original Sin. If you haven't yet, I'd be super thankful if you'd subscribe to the channel for more Dexter and other content. So with all that out of the way, let's jump into some high-level thoughts as far as what happened here in this episode. So starting off with some characters, I probably sound like a broken record here, but over the last few episodes, all of the characters have been really strong here. This specific episode, I feel like Christian Slater as Harry was a particular high standout for me personally. All three Morgans here really shine, Dexter, Deb, and Harry across the board here. As far as plot details, not too much to say here without going into too much spoilers. We obviously got some level of closure on both the kidnapping and NHI murders here, and they wrapped up the direction for the future as well here in a way that makes the beginning of the original series still work nicely. I'm pretty satisfied with how they tie things up here. Although I will say I felt they played it pretty safe here, but maybe that's the smarter route given the last two season finales that we have gotten. With all of this in mind, I'm giving the final episode here a positive rating. Sure, could have ended with a big gut punch or a surprise twist here and there, but I think the direction they went with provided a satisfactory conclusion to what I consider an overall successful season. And as I mentioned in some of the earlier on reviews, I'm not a big fan of prequels, so that's pretty high praise coming from me. So now to jump into a detailed breakdown of the episode. So spoiler warning here, we're going to talk about specifics as far as what happened in this episode. So we start off the episode with flashback of Brian and Dexter in the shipping container. And Brian's like telling Dexter stories, trying to keep him distracted because obviously his mother's there dead in front of them. Then we see Harry rush in to save him. So we're kind of getting Brian's perspective of what took place here. Obviously, we've always seen Harry rushing in to save Dexter and pull him away from Brian. But this time we get things from Brian's perspective as he's trying to protect Dexter and not have him be scarred from the whole situation. We then fast forward a little bit to the scene where Brian's being taken away from the Morgans and being driven away by the social worker. And he's kind of narrating this scene. It feels like very much Brian's story this first few minutes of the episode. Definitely satisfying a lot of people's requests to have Brian as a spin-off series. We've definitely gotten that in the last couple episodes, so it feels like that story's been pretty much handled at this point in time. But as I was saying, we have Brian kind of narrating, going from family to family and being just adopted in different areas and it not working out each of the stops he has along the way. He then ultimately gets taken to the medical facility that we've seen he's been at this whole time. And we get a weird aging transition here. We have Brian kind of growing up in different ages. And then we find out that the nurse he killed early on in the series was stealing his meds. He winds up assaulting that guy. And then we fast forward to now adult Brian as he's talking in a therapy session to this therapist and asking to see his brother Dexter. The therapist winds up making Brian mad and he winds up taking his rage out and killing the therapist. After Brian brutally murders that guy, he winds up taking his car. I'm kind of wondering, how did Brian get there if he needed to take the guy's car to leave, but probably nitpick there. We then for the first time cut to Dexter, who's tailing Spencer, kind of leading off from the previous episode. And as he was hoping for, Spencer drives to where Nikki's at. That's still kind of a nitpick I probably have as far as the plot line goes, because why is Spencer interested in going to Nikki after escaping from Dexter? Doesn't feel like that's the first place he would go, but either way, he chooses to do so. We find out that Nikki's being held at this boat. We then cut to Harry and Deb in the hospital there for Bobby, and LaGuerta shows up there. And she mentions to Harry there's a rooftop body that took place. Obviously, in the previous episode, we know that this is Brian's victim. And he winds up talking to LaGuerta a bit, and LaGuerta mentions the name of the victim, which Harry recognizes as the social worker that he previously worked with. So he's like, okay, I'm going to head to the crime scene. So we're doing a bit of a back and forth here between Harry's story and Dexter's story. So back to Dexter's side of things. We have Dexter now following Spencer on foot on the boat. He winds up banging a bunch of pots and yelling for Spencer. So Spencer now knows he's there. We hear Nikki faintly crying for help at this point. Dexter winds up shutting off the lights. He says something like he's a creature of the darkness and that he thrives in the dark. We then cut back to Harry's story, now at the crime scene on that rooftop, and we see the beheaded social workers. It's a pretty gory scene here once again. So this and Laura's chainsaw situation, both chainsaw scenes are pretty much the most gory scenes throughout the entire season. Obviously at this point, Harry knows it's Brian, so knowing that, he realizes, oh, Brian's in the background of all these photos, so he's likely at the crime scene here, waiting for Dexter to show up. So Harry's kind of looking all around the crime scene, trying to find out where Brian's at, and finally he sees him on the bridge up above. We then cut back to Dexter looking for Nikki, and he has some lights on, so I'm like, okay, creature of the night, you're definitely still using the lights at this point, even if it's not the main lights, but either way, Spencer winds up seeing him, shoots a flare at him, and then hits him. Spencer then goes down to this area where he turns on this water valve to pretty much have Nikki, who's chained down to this room below him, get flooded with water. I don't know if this is the same area Nikki's been held captive the whole time, but it seems like a much larger area, at least vertically. Dexter tries to stop him from doing this and yells, "This is your son," and Spencer goes, "Is it?" So definitely leaning towards the side of things where people have been talking about this is not actually his kid, which I don't know. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but the whole blood situation feels like a little off with that, but I'll talk about that later on. So then Captain Spencer gives Dexter two options, either chase me or save Nikki. He winds up doing the more heroic option, going down to save Nikki. It seems like Nikki's passed out, so for a moment there, we're not sure if he's going to live. Dexter winds up grabbing this metal pole and breaking the chain lock and winds up saving Nikki. Afterwards feels very much like a Batman type situation where Dexter shoots a flare a couple times to get the police to wind up coming there, but he leaves before they show up, so trying to get them to show up to save Nikki, but doesn't want to be there at the scene when they show up. We then get a brief scene back at the hospital with Deb, who's talking to Bobby and getting very emotional about all the things that have been going wrong for her. Feels very similar to the scene where she's at the gravesite for her mom. It's just a great performance by the actress here, really making you feel what Deb's going through. We then cut back to the rooftop crime scene. We have Brian looking for Dexter, and then Harry shows up with a gun pointing at Brian. They have a bit of dialogue back and forth. Brian explains why he killed each of the people he killed. And then Harry tells Brian he's going to make sure he doesn't get to Dexter. So we've been wondering this whole time, how is Brian going to kind of disappear and not re-enter to Dexter's life for another 15 years. Some people were thinking maybe he's going to get arrested, which almost happens here, but it seems like they're going to probably go the route of saying Harry kind of convinces Brian, Dexter's better off without you, at least for now. There's even a line here, I feel like Harry does this a lot in the season where somebody says one line and Harry repeats the line back to him, but throws some extra pieces onto it. So Brian says Dexter needs him, and Harry says, "You're right, he needs you to let him go." And I feel like for the first time in a couple episodes, we feel somewhat sympathetic towards Harry because the last couple episodes feels like he's been responsible for what happened to Laura and all the trauma that's really happened to Dexter and a lot of people around them. But in this scene, we have some apology coming from Harry saying, "Sorry, I did what I thought was best. I tried to save Dexter because he was salvageable still. Felt like you were too much of a lost cause, unfortunately." He thought Brian was too far gone and tells Brian he's the best thing for Dexter, and Brian knows it. Brian then tells Harry he's not going to prison and tells Harry just shoot him. Harry's very reluctant to do it. We actually see Brian as a child in somewhat of Harry's point of view, so he's very sympathetic towards Brian, even though he didn't wind up saving him, and really feels bad for him and wishes he could change things, but realizes this is unfortunately the outcome that took place. Then Brian winds up knocking him out. We then cut to Nikki's mom, who's waiting by the TV. The guy she's with is going upstairs, and I don't know if she's in the basement or what happened here, but as he's going upstairs, he gets thrown downstairs by Captain Spencer. She winds up running to another room, locking herself in. Spencer's just berating and yelling at her. Sounds like in this scene specifically, Spencer calls out that Nikki's not his kid. So here's where I'll go into more detail what I mentioned earlier with the blood situation. So previously at the end of one of the episodes a couple episodes ago, we had Dexter in the lab with Spencer, and one of the big signs to him that Spencer was the killer was that the blood matched between the blood on the box and the kid. That and the cut on Spencer's arm were the two really defining factors as far as Dexter's belief that Spencer is the kidnapper. And are we saying at this point in time that they're not blood related and the blood just happened to match, so that Dexter was kind of going off of false information as far as using that to believe Spencer's the kidnapper? I guess that's what we're going with, because there's definitely a couple scenes here in this episode where Spencer calls out this kid wasn't mine and really questions if it was his kid. I don't know if we want to say he just went crazy and he wasn't really sure if Nikki was his, and her wound up cheating on the captain with the guy that she's now with really drove him to going mad. I don't know if we want to say that, but it seems like from the audience perspective, we now believe that, yeah, Nikki is not Spencer's kid, but I'm still not really sure why they did the whole blood thing. And maybe that's just coincidental and it's not really supposed to be a big point, and that the cut on the arm was supposed to be the bigger thing, or just Dexter being such a super genius when it comes to finding serial killers was supposed to be the point there. But just feel like they really hammered home the blood match scene previously, and that didn't wind up mattering, it sounds like, because they weren't actually blood related. But either way, that may be a little bit of a nitpick, but I feel like that's still kind of an integral part of the story, so I think it's fair to question in some ways. But either way, as Spencer is distracted as he's banging on the door, yelling at his ex-wife, Dexter comes up behind him and injects him and knocks him out. And as he's carrying away, he looks over at the TV and sees Brian's crime scene there. We then cut back to that crime scene. Harry's just kind of waking up and he's handcuffed to where he left off with Brian. And we see on the wall it says, "You're right." I'm not really sure what that was written with, but it's written in red on the wall, "You're right." Pretty much letting us as the audience know that Brian's going to back off from Dexter because Harry convinced him that Dexter's better off with Harry instead of Brian. After getting up and getting out of there, we have Harry rush to the hospital and find out that Bobby's okay. We then cut back to Dexter on the boat on the slice of pie. I'm not really sure how we got to use the boat here once again, but we'll just assume maybe he has a key to the boat. He winds up having Spencer tied down once again, and he's talking down to him. We have kind of a cool scene where Dexter has the blade over Spencer's face, and we see Dexter's eyes in the reflection, so cool imagery here. The conversation doesn't go on for too long. Spencer says, "Get this over with," and Dexter slashes him in the throat and dismembers his body with rocks in the bags and dumping him into the ocean, making Spencer, as we kind of expected, or at least maybe some of us thought, that Spencer would be Dexter's first Bay Harbor Butcher official ocean victim, which turns out to be true here. We have a transition here from the bubbles of the ocean to Harry's bubbly drink back at home. Dexter comes home. Harry's watching the news and says, Dexter, you were right about Spencer. Sorry I didn't listen to you. And then Dexter says back to him, it's okay, Dad. I didn't listen to you. Kind of giving Harry the idea of what took place here. At first, Harry seems pretty distraught here, and I'm wondering, is this going to be the scene where he gets kind of pushed over the edge? But he winds up saying Spencer was his friend and he had no idea, so pretty much leaning towards siding with Dexter here. Dexter gives the line something along the lines of, Spencer became a monster, but Dexter himself, he was born this way. We have the scene close out with Dexter thanking Harry for guiding him, saying, sorry that was your friend. Harry says, you did the right thing, son. So kind of a cool scene here as far as bonding between the two of them and Harry acknowledging, you're my son, Dexter. We then get a brief scene with Deb back at school, and she's making up with Sophia. So it seems like they're on good terms once again. We then cut to Harry at Miami Metro talking to Batista, and they're talking about the cases. It's kind of ironic here. I feel like the two big cases, the kidnapping and the NHI murders, Harry knows the outcome of both of them, but he can't really talk about either of them. But we have Harry tell Batista that Maria was wrong. The NHI murders are not related cases, so covering for Brian in this instance. I know a lot of people have had speculation maybe Harry doesn't actually commit suicide in the story like he does in the original series. Maybe Brian winds up killing him, so hopefully him letting Brian go isn't something that comes back full circle similar to Dexter and Trinity in the original series. We then cut to the forensics office. We have Tanya give Dexter his official laminate and says he can join the force full time. So nothing really happens with Tanya. I know I had that poll as far as you guys giving your thoughts as far as what would take place with Tanya. It seems like the answer was neither. It was nothing. She was just kind of here for the ride. She didn't wind up having any really impactful scenes as far as being a killer victim. Even beyond that, she didn't really have that many impactful scenes, even as a Miami Metro cast member. So kind of a strange casting choice there, picking a big-name actress for a role that doesn't really amount to much. Maybe that was supposed to be a red herring or just a decoy for folks. And then we have that scene close out with the classic Dexter spinning on his chair round and round. As we're closing out the episodes, one of the scenes we get is back at the hospital. We have Harry bringing Bobby out in a wheelchair with happy Miami music playing. Then we have Dexter think to himself, this is what I have to do because some people deserve to live. It's kind of validating his decision to kill people for the greater good, ultimately. We then cut to the restaurant they've used for pretty much the entire season. We have the three Morgans, Dexter, Deb, and Harry, all having lunch with one another. We have Deb show Harry an acceptance letter, and he's assuming, hey, this is Florida State. But we realize this is for Miami Metro Police Academy. She says because of Tanya, Camilla, Maria, and Bobby sacrificing, she wants to join. So kind of seems like, yes, Tanya's role could have been trying to influence Deb to join Miami Metro. Deb then tells them both now they'll have to include her in all of their secret conversations, which is pretty funny here because they kind of look at each other being like, yeah, right, that's not going to happen. We then get a brief conversation between Harry and Dexter here, and it's kind of weird they're doing this in public, but they're talking about kind of Dexter's urges, and Harry points out that Dexter channels his urges for good, and that's now Dexter's code. After Dexter refers to it as Harry's code, Harry's like, no, Dexter, you've done a great job. This is all on you now. I'm not going to be here someday, so now this is your code to take on. And kind of a strange moment here. I feel like at the end of New Blood, we have the showrunners really want to pitch Dexter as a serial killer being a bad guy, not a good guy. Even though he kills bad people, he's a bad guy. But in this instance, we're definitely glorifying Dexter. Maybe we want to say, yeah, that's why we brought the show back, because we want to make him a good guy again. But it feels kind of mixed with the direction they're trying to pitch Dexter as being, is he doing stuff for the greater good? I know he's killing people regardless, but is that a net positive for the world? I don't know. I guess that's up to us as the viewers to decide that, but he's the protagonist, so I feel like most of us are going to be rooting for him. So we're closing things out as everyone's dancing and music's playing. Dexter gives his final line of saying family saved him, and then we see Brian in the window as he's watching Dexter, so kind of a double meaning there as far as saying Harry saved him, but Brian's there wanting to be his family, so kind of a bleak ending for Brian as far as his future goes. Yeah, that's just how they end things. Overall, I really liked how they closed things out. I do think in some ways they played it safe, but I enjoyed it for the most part, and I fully expect the season 2 at this point based off how successful season 1 was. Curious to see the direction they may go there. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you want to see a season 2? If we have one, what are some areas you want them to explore further? Do you think Brian's gone for good, or do you think they would include him in some episodes going forward? And what are your thoughts on how they handled some of the characters? Obviously, as I mentioned, we didn't get much payoff for Tanya. We didn't really get any payoff for Clark. We didn't really get any payoff for Gio's story. Those were just kind of side plots that we explored along the way. They didn't really matter to the bigger picture of things, which is fine. Obviously, not everything's going to be a main plot point, but interesting to see that we didn't really flesh out some of those areas. Maybe they would do that in the future as well. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'll probably do one more video on Original Sin, just talking about kind of my culminating thoughts as far as how the season went, and probably reviewing my wish list and my expectations for the season and how things went. How did you think everything went this season? How did you think that compares to your expectations going into things? Let's continue the conversation on Dexter Original Sin, Dexter Resurrection, and all things Dexter going forward down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and hope to talk to you again soon.